A strange hush settled over the golden grass, broken only by the desperate, uneven breaths of a lioness staggering through the heat. Her flanks heaved, her amber eyes wide with panic. In her jaws, limp and blooded, hung her cub. Each step looked like agony. The cub's shallow breaths weakened with every mile. The lioness paused once, ears twitching, listening for danger. But what she feared most wasn't another predator. It was what she was walking toward. Ahead, through the shimmering air, stood a structure no wild creature dared to approach, a ranger's outpost. Human scent, smoke, metal, the smell of fire. The kind of place every animal was born knowing to fear. But fear meant nothing now. Only her cub mattered. Inside the small station, Ranger Daniel Hayes was cleaning his rifle when he heard it, an eerie, low growl followed by a weak cry. He froze, hand hovering above the trigger. Outside, something was moving through the grass, slowly, deliberately. When he stepped to the window, his breath caught. A lioness. Not charging. Not stalking. Standing still, her golden coat streaked with dirt and blood. And at her feet, a tiny cub, motionless. Daniel's instinct screamed, "Don't move." Every survival lesson told him to stay inside. But the lioness didn't attack. She looked up, straight at him, eyes filled not with fury, but pleading. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. Two worlds, predator and protector, staring across an invisible line no one had ever crossed. Then Daniel saw the cub's chest falter, barely rising. He dropped the rifle. "Oh my God," he whispered, grabbing his med kit. He stepped outside, slowly, heart pounding so loud it drowned the wind. The lioness didn't growl. She backed away one step, just enough. Her tail flicked once, trembling. A mother's silent surrender. Daniel knelt beside the cub, hands shaking, whispering comfort to both of them. "Hang in there, little one." He pressed a bandage against the wound, feeling the faint flutter of life beneath his fingers. The lioness watched every motion, muscles tensed, eyes glistening with animal fear, and something else. Trust. The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting them in red and gold. One man. One lioness. And a dying cub between them. For the first time in the wild, a mother's love outweighed her instinct. But as night fell and distant roars echoed through the plain, Daniel realized this was only the beginning. The night air was still, heavy with the scent of dust and fear. The small outpost lantern flickered, throwing long, nervous shadows across the ground where the cub lay, barely clinging to life. Ranger Daniel knelt beside it, hands trembling as he opened his med kit. Just feet away, the lioness stood in the dark, her golden eyes glowing like molten fire. Every instinct in him screamed that this was madness. One wrong move and she could end him in seconds. Yet something deeper, older, held him still. The sight of her trembling, pacing, making low, desperate whimpers, it wasn't a predator's growl. It was a mother's prayer. "Easy, girl," Daniel whispered, his voice steady though his heart hammered like thunder. "I'm gonna help your baby." He dabbed at the cub's wound, a deep gash along its side, likely from a hyena attack. The cub flinched weakly. The lioness growled, a low rumble that froze his spine. Daniel froze too, hands raised. Their eyes met again. No words. Just a fragile, invisible bridge of trust holding the moment together. Minutes crawled by like hours. Sweat poured down his face as he cleaned, stitched, and wrapped the wound using what little gauze he had. The lioness inched closer, her breath hot and sharp in the air. Daniel didn't move. Only when the cub let out a faint mewl, the sound of life returning, did she stop growling. "Come on, little fighter," he murmured. "Stay with me." The lioness lowered herself beside them, her tail brushing the dirt, her eyes softening with something almost human, relief. For a heartbeat, Daniel felt it too, the miracle of coexistence, the rare silence where fear bowed to compassion. When he finally leaned back, the cub's breathing steadied. The ranger exhaled shakily, looking up to find the lioness staring at him, not as prey, not as an enemy, but as an ally. For a fleeting moment, man and beast shared the same purpose, life. Then, with the faintest rumble, she picked up her cub and melted into the dark like a ghost. Daniel stayed frozen, heart pounding, realizing what had just happened, and wondering if she'd ever come back. He had no idea that this fragile trust had just rewritten the laws of the wild. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the savannah changed. Every morning, Ranger Daniel woke before sunrise to find fresh tracks in the sand, the lioness's prints, circling the edge of his outpost. She never came closer, but she never left. Inside, the cub, now named Keto, began to heal. The stitched wound closed slowly, his fur growing back in golden tufts. He wobbled when he walked, and Daniel's heart lifted with every step. At night, he'd hear the lioness call softly from the darkness, a low hum that made Keto's ears perk and his tail twitch. Sometimes, Daniel would sit outside under the stars, whispering into the vast silence, "He's getting stronger, you know. You did good, girl." He never expected an answer, but he always felt her watching, the faint glint of eyes beyond the trees, patient and proud. Trust, once fragile, had grown roots. Daniel began leaving scraps of meat near the edge of the clearing, not as a bribe, but as gratitude. The next mornings, they were gone. Sometimes, he'd find her paw prints closer to the door than before. One afternoon, Keto managed to climb onto Daniel's lap, purring weakly as the ranger laughed for the first time in months. Outside, in the shadows, a pair of golden eyes blinked slowly, watching, approving. Man and lioness, two guardians sharing one small heartbeat in the wild. But the peace wouldn't last. The ranger's radio had gone silent for days. Strange tracks appeared near the outpost, heavy boots, the stench of oil and gunpowder. The savannah was holding its breath again. And as the lioness lifted her head from the tall grass, sensing danger, Daniel had no idea their fragile bond was about to be tested like never before. The morning of the release was breathtaking, the kind of golden sunrise that made the whole savannah shimmer like a sea of light. Ranger Daniel stood beside the open gate of the pen, the young cub pacing inside, strong and restless now. Keto had grown leaner, faster. His wound was just a faint scar beneath the fur, a memory of pain that had turned into strength. Daniel knelt, brushing a hand over the cub's head one last time. "You're ready, little warrior," he whispered, voice tight. "Time to go home." Keto blinked, confused for a moment, then looked toward the horizon, as if he could already sense the life waiting for him out there. Daniel opened the gate. For a second, the cub hesitated. Then, with a final glance over his shoulder, he bounded into the tall grass, swallowed by the golden expanse. From somewhere beyond the ridge came the answering call, deep, resonant, powerful. The lioness. Daniel froze, heart swelling. Through the grass, her silhouette appeared, majestic, proud, eyes fixed on him. She didn't charge, didn't hide. Just stood there, waiting. Keto raced toward her, tumbling into her embrace. She nuzzled him, licking his face with the gentleness only a mother could give. Daniel watched, his throat tightening. He wanted to step closer, to say goodbye, but he knew this moment wasn't his to claim. It belonged to them, to the wild. The lioness lifted her gaze to him once more. Their eyes met, the same silent understanding that had once bridged fear and hope now returned as something deeper. Gratitude. Then she turned, leading her cub back into the wilderness. Within seconds, they vanished into the tall grass, leaving only the whisper of the wind. Daniel stood there long after they were gone, the silence pressing heavy on his chest. He had done his duty. Saved a life. But why did it feel like he was the one who'd been saved? As the days passed, life at the outpost slipped back into routine, reports, patrols, long, lonely nights. Yet sometimes, when the moon was high and the wind shifted just right, he could swear he heard a distant roar, strong, echoing, and familiar. He smiled. "You're out there," he murmured. "And maybe, that's enough." But fate wasn't finished with them. Not yet. The savannah was alive again, but not with peace. Ranger Daniel trudged through the thick underbrush, tracking signs of illegal traps laid by poachers. The air was heavy, hot, and buzzing with tension. He had reported strange tracks near the reserve for days, but now he was alone, miles from the outpost, chasing shadows. Then he heard it, the faint snap of wire. Before he could react, the ground gave way beneath him. A snare whipped tight around his leg, flinging him hard against the dirt. Pain shot through his body. He tried to reach his knife, but the cable cut deeper with every move. Blood trickled down his calf. His radio was shattered. "Damn it, no, no, no." He clawed at the ground, but the trap was anchored deep. The sun began to drop, and with it came the haunting realization, he might not make it through the night. From somewhere in the distance came a sound, faint at first, then closer. Branches snapping. A low growl rolling through the air. Daniel's chest tightened. "Not now," he whispered, gripping his useless knife. The brush parted. A lioness stepped into the clearing, her golden coat shimmering under the fading light. Time froze. Daniel's mind screamed danger, but then he saw it, the scar across her shoulder. Recognition hit him like thunder. "It's you," he whispered. Behind her emerged a massive young male, muscles rippling, mane just forming, Keto. The cub he had once held in trembling hands. The lioness circled Daniel, sniffing the blood, the metal trap. Her growl wasn't one of hunger. It was fury, ancient, righteous fury. She turned and roared toward the trees, a sound that shook the air. Moments later, two distant figures fled, poachers. She had driven them away. Daniel stared, breathless, as Keto stepped closer. The young lion bent low, sniffing the wire, then clamped his jaws around it. Muscles tensed, a guttural growl building as he pulled. The metal creaked, strained, and snapped. Daniel fell back, free, stunned beyond words. The lioness approached slowly, her eyes locking with his once more. The same eyes that once begged for mercy now shone with unspoken gratitude. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "You remembered." For a long moment, man and lion simply breathed the same air, no fear, no divide, only something eternal. The savanna wind brushed over them like a blessing. Then, as silently as they came, the lions turned. Keto lingered for one last look, a single, powerful roar that echoed across the plains, and disappeared into the golden horizon beside his mother. Daniel watched until the last flick of their tails vanished. His hands trembled as he whispered, "A debt repaid, and a promise kept." When the rescue team finally found him the next morning, he said only one thing before collapsing into their arms. "The wild remembers kindness." And though no one believed his story, every night after, when the wind carried a distant roar, Daniel smiled, because he knew gratitude had found a voice in the heart of the wild.